All right. So first and foremost, I have to say that it's been an honor and pleasure to be an ambassador this year with this great class. So I'm a two-time master inventor with IBM. I'm a senior technical staff member. I work in sports and entertainment. So I do a lot of the work for the Grand Slam events for tennis, golf, football, some fantasy sports, and it's a blast, right? But today what I want to do, I want to take you on my own personal journey so that perhaps we can better understand the mind by looking at different types of surgery, different types of algorithms, as well as patterns. Let's see if I can get this going. Okay. So by trade, I'm a computer scientist. I mean, you could think that I'm a boomerang computer scientist. I tend to go out and immerse myself in other fields, and I always come back. And I noticed that in order to better understand and contribute to the field of artificial intelligence, or today, some people know it as cognitive computing, that I wanted to immerse myself more into the neuroscience area and really get a grasp of how the clinical setting worked, see the human side of that, and then come back and see what I could do. So at around 5 a.m., my alarm clock goes off. I make my way down to the McKnight Brain Institute at the University of Florida. I walk in, I get dressed, and scrubs, and I'm walked over into a pre-operating room. I look at all of the different systems that folks have before and after surgery, and I'm dumbfounded by the complexity, but also the necessity of these types of systems that help to support patients. Next, I'm brought over into another room, and a patient walks in. So the patient comes in, and suddenly, in scuttles in two nurses as well as two neuroscientists and a physician. They proceed, to look at the patient, and they have 4 screws, or bolts, very big bolts. They take a screwdriver and they insert 2 rostral and 2 caudal. And I'm sitting there looking and watching this, and the patient's eyes turn blustering red. The pressure, the intracranial pressure of that patient, his eyes were just almost about to burst out. And his wife looks at me. And at that moment in time, my life changed. Time stopped. It had no meaning. But she asked me, so is my husband going to be okay? I'm a computer scientist. I'd never been in any sort of situation like this before. So I have to keep myself together. And I looked at her and I said, yes, I think everything is going to be okay. His prognosis looks to be good. This is an operation that he needs to go through, right? But at that moment, I really felt how powerful these systems within the medical area, can have for human lives. And so what happened with those screws that they put in, the reason why, this patient had a severe case of Parkinson's disease. So in the substantia nigra, he had nigral cells that were depleting at a very rapid pace, so he had a lack of dopamine. And what that dopamine does in the brain is it helps to diffuse out electrical signals so that you stop shaking and having all these tremors, and you can control your muscles better. And so they mount a head cage onto a patient after they have gone through it, and the patient has to be awake during the full surgery. And what happens is they take a macro electrode. It's called deep brain stimulation surgery. So they take a macro electrode and they drill down into the brain, and they try to localize the neurons that control the tremor. It could be a tremoring hand, it could be a twitching face, any part of the body, right? And they use fMRI to try to localize, where exactly those neurons are, but it's not precise. And so there's a second neurosurgeon who listens onto acoustic headphones as a macro electrode is going down into the brain to try to locate exactly what neurons are controlling what part of the body. So it's a miracle that it works. It's also gruesome at the same token to watch, right? And so I noticed that a lot of the way that the brain works, right, we could potentially use that within the artificial intelligence world, within deep learning, right, that's emerging today. But also on the flip side, we could use deep learning algorithms to help patients that are undergoing these types of surgeries. And so you're probably asking yourself, how did I get into the operating room? I ask myself that every day. I still don't know. But I was at Georgia Tech as an undergraduate and did some research there where my goal was to build these proprioception devices so that a patient could go to sleep or be anesthetized such that they could go ahead and be more relaxed, not have any consciousness, while the macroelectrode was going down in the brain. So my goal was to build the stimulus and attach it as a wearable computing device so that it would go on a muscle spindle. So much like virtual reality systems today, if you close your eyes and you have this kind of device on, you would think your arm is actually moving up, but it's really not. It's very fascinating and bizarre when that happens. You can put it on any muscle, any spindle that recognizes force, right? And so I built what's called this big green monster. It's this very large brick that I built that actually went into the operating room. So I had to shield it so it didn't interfere with any of the other medical devices that they used. Unfortunately, it didn't work, right? And I was quite confused, as were some of the other folks who worked on the project. Why didn't it work, right? And this to me was, at the time, very devastating as to why it didn't work. But to me today, it was a successful failure, because this urged me and caused me to go and learn more about why it didn't work. But also I wanted to learn more about the brain, right, so that I could take that back into computer science as well. And so what I wanted to do, right, is I wanted to, like I said, create this symbiosis between computer science and neuroscience. And within the field of neuroscience, it's very complex. You have billions of neurons, you have trillions of synapses that interact together, but it's this black box. It's very hard to comprehend, right? We have to use indirect tools to understand that. And then over on the computer science area, if you translate that into neural networks, deep learning, convolutional networks, I mean, there's a zoo of neural networks today, right? But they're very computationally advanced, complicated. There's a lot of mathematical operations that happen behind the scenes. That's, again, like a black box. So they have a lot of similarities between it. But you also have to train these algorithms. And there's many different types of parameters that you have to set. It's almost like an art. Well, it still is an art today to define that. And then I noticed that as I look at the brain, brain could fit into a shoebox, right? And it runs off of only 12 volts or watts of power, right? And then on the flip side, if I were to translate that into a von Neumann chip, a silicon chip today, it takes 12 gigawatts of power, which is enough power to run Los Angeles and New York City combined, right? That's a lot of power. And then the square footage, it's not a shoebox anymore, but you're looking at 720 square meters of space to put this into, right? So there's a lot that has to be done. However, there is a neuromorphic computing paradigm that's also on the way as well. And so combining all this together, I decided to continue my education, and I went to Johns Hopkins and I did a rotation at the National Institute of Health, National Institute of Neurological Disorder and Stroke. And what I wanted to do there was to learn about the plasticity of the brain. How does the brain reorganize? How does it change? How do we learn? How do we overcome different types of ailment like a stroke, right? Well, there are many ways of which you can measure that, and I learned a lot of this, right? So I learned about repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation, fMRIs, CAT scans, transcranial magnetic stimulation, virtual lesions. How do you turn off a part of the brain, right, in real time to actually see what happens? Worked with real patients again, right, and saw the human side of all of this, right? And what this led to was two protocols. The first protocol that I worked on is we looked at patients who came in who had stroke, and we also had patients who came in who did not have stroke. So it was a very basic science experiments that we ran. And we had a group that would try to catch a block with their two fingers. So they had to catch a block, and we would turn off a part of the brain. So create a virtual lesion with a figure-8 magnet. So it's very strange, but you can almost create like a slice of the brain that doesn't work, that doesn't exist anymore, and see what happens. And so we found that patients that had stroke, the premotor cortex took over the functionality of the primary motor cortex, right? So it was validated. And likewise, with healthy patients, the M1 section of the primary motor cortex still was able to control the two fingers. Now, the second protocol was just as interesting to me. Here, we had patients who had a finger or a thumb in this case, and we applied a pulse of electricity into specific neurons, and we would see which direction would the thumb twitch. If the thumb twitched right, that meant that the thumb was encoded towards the left, and likewise in the opposite direction. So our goal was we wanted to change the encoding of the thumb in the brain, which changed the structure of the neurons in the brain. So we had patients that would actually watch a video over days and move their thumb in the opposite direction of which it twitched, and in an effort to have the brain change structure in real time. It's very plastic, right? So it learns. And unbelievably, right, what happened was whenever, after that training happened, and we gave that twitch, the thumb for all the patients twitched in the opposite direction than it twitched before, which indicates that we changed the structure of the brain in real time. And so throughout my studies, I worked for IBM, and I did a lot of biometrics work for about 7 years at the beginning of my career at IBM. So I did facial recognition, fingerprint, voice, and iris. And then I was able to combine a lot of the neuroscience work that I learned, there, and it culminated into a book that I wrote called Multimedia Data Mining and Analytics. And one of the chapters in there is about support vector machines. It's about associative neural networks, about classification. It's about C-means and K-means clustering, but all these different types of techniques that are used that, to me, are inspired through biomimicry within systems, right? And so this also led me down my first path of one of my 50 patents that I have today that was filed in 2007 called neuroplastic fidelity, which used plasticity of the brain that I learned within neuroscience to actually change a neural network, by damaging it, right, by giving it an artificial stroke, right? And it took about 4 years, but it was granted in 2011. So I felt very proud about that. That's something tangible that I felt like I contributed to the field, right? And that could help improve other people's lives. And as a computer scientist, I tend to do things in pairs. So I sat in on 2 open brain surgeries, and I worked on 2 protocols within neuroscience, right? And I boomeranged back into computer science, which is my home. And I learned that there is always a human side to everything that we do, and that we think about the patient first, we think about the user first, and the ramifications of that technology, right? And I think the ambassador program here helps give a face to inventing, which is part of that. So again, I'm very proud to be a part of the program. And again, in pairs, my 2 daughters, Cecily, who is 3.5, just turned 3.5, and then Caitlin, who is 4. I hope to inspire them and encourage them to follow their passions and dreams. So I do hope that they can learn and also instill in them courage to innovate and have lasting impact through invention. So with that, thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I guess we can talk during the reception, and you can also reach me on Twitter or Facebook or any of the popular social media today. Thanks.